So we're honored to be joined by Professor Herman Singh this morning. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through the very substantial CV and bio. Please feel free to find that on our registration page. But suffice to say, Herman has graduated from WITS with a degree in engineering, postgraduate in industrial engineering and MBA. He's enjoyed a stellar career starting in manufacturing before moving to consulting and advisory. He was director of online services at Standard Bank, managing executive of mobile commerce at Vodacom, before moving to MTN, where he served as the group chief digital officer. He currently serves as a professor at the GSB and adjunct faculty at Duke University, University of Johannesburg, and the Gordon Institute of Business in Joburg, along with numerous board positions. Professor Singh is also a published author, and his new book, Devolution, which is a really interesting read, taking a deeper look into how to survive and thrive in digital wars, and written metaphorically as a war between the old analog versus the new digital. Professor Singh, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
I'll be talking about really the impact of technology on both office and work, and it comes out of a set of series that I've been presenting and webinars on exactly this subject, going back probably to the beginning of this crisis. And so I've been observing and studying it for a while. As I've said, a lot of this is based on the book Devolution. And if you enjoy what I'm speaking about, please go ahead and get the book and read it. So the real question I want to answer today is what happened to the office? But to understand what happened to the office it's important to understand where the office came from, why the office looks the way it does, what we intended when we built the office in the first place, what work means and how the nature of work has changed, and then finally to look at what COVID has done, and to then, based on that, understand the trajectory and the road that we're going to take forward. And of course, there's a few takeouts I'll give you in terms of how to prepare for that. If you basically look at the world today, I'm going to work. To work used to be a noun. Work was a place that we went to, and today it's basically a verb. Today I'm going to work means I'm going to start to do something, and so it's become a verb. That's a very powerful comment. So in other words, work is not equal to the office, and office is not equal to work. And so the first point that's really powerful is the transition from noun to verb, and the second is that office and work are actually two totally separate things. We've bound them in our mind. And so what's beginning to happen is an unbinding that's happening. It's called a decoupling. It's called the great decoupling, the great reset. That's what's happening. We are decoupling the concept of work from the concept of a place where things happen and things are stored. So let's talk about the evolution and the devolution of the office. Devolution is obviously the title of my book, and it's a shortened version of the expression digital evolution. That's where the book comes from. So what's happened is, if you have a look at the office in the 1800s, it actually was a very haphazard thing. Offices were built to really manage factories, and it was built to manage, I guess, sales and the logistics for the factory. Then gradually, men started moving in and displacing women. Actually, many women actually worked in these offices, and so over time, we, in a very haphazard way, started grouping more and more people together. They turned into typing stations during the Second World War. And then gradually we ended up with cubicles. So it ended up by default rather than by design. Nobody sat down and said, what should an office look like? And so what happened is offices began to aggregate more and more what I call bloatware. It began to be overloaded with personnel, tasks, processes, equipment, miscellaneous technology that didn't work together. And in fact, we had things like office managers. And so the friction that was created was so high that we needed to hire people to manage the office because there were so many people coming in and going out, and none of these were value adding. People didn't pay you. Your customer didn't pay you for having an office. I didn't care if you had an office or didn't have an office. I didn't care if you had security. I didn't care if you had reception. I didn't care if you had an office manager. You needed all of those things, including canteens, because you chose to build an office. And so you aggregated this building with this weird religious thing called work. And so what happened is you then threw a whole bunch of technology at this thing. Having sunk all this money into the building and the land, you then started adding UPSs, computers, servers, surveillance, etc. And more technology got in, and the sunk cost kept getting higher, and the legacy stuff kept getting more and more obsolete. In fact, most of us had much better technology at home than we had in the office. So, and then of course, we said, wow, we're really struggling to recover the cost of this building. Let's put more people in. And so you really started this process called densification. And we started pouring people in and getting them closer and closer and closer together. Well, of course, COVID, it was inevitable because we did the same thing with planes, we did the same thing with hotels, we did the same thing with cinemas, we did the same thing with restaurants. What's really driven COVID is this ridiculous strategy of improving return on fixed assets through densification of customers and workers. So this whole thing is being unraveled. This densification strategy is being unraveled. So you really shouldn't cry for the office. I mean, many of us are now crying for this thing. We need to go back. Actually, I'm not really sure why you want to go back, because it's very clear that offices can be very frustrating. And other than the fact that it's nice being around other people, and there's a huge emotional impact from seeing and meeting people, I don't know why we need an office. In fact, offices are really social clubs. And if you want a social life, well, you should have one outside of work. But to build a business around having people talk to each other socially, physically, I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense anymore. So what's happened is that the office did not change, but the nature of work changed. So while offices remained exactly the way they were, which is this anachronistic throwback to the 1960s, work didn't stay still. Work kept evolving. Remember I said work and offices are different. So the nature of work began to change because nobody asked the question, why do we need an office? So let's track the nature of work. Why did we need an office in the first place, and how has work changed? You go back to the year 1000, say, and 1800s, Dutch East India Company, that kind of stuff. It was a vault for storing and processing of documents. By the 1900s, you needed access to typewriters and managers for transactional work on documents. You're working with physical documents. You needed stamps and typewriters. By 1950s, we had a whole bunch of people come out of the army, and they basically came into offices and they implemented command and control. And command and control was executed using documents. So documents where they would issue you a memo and you would work on that basis, because that's how armies worked. By the 1980s, the only reason you were going in was because you needed access to the terminals, the systems, managers, and documents, because everything was stored in one place. And a lot of what we needed to do our work was physically there. By 2000, we still needed access to systems managers, but now we were starting to collaborate more, and we were collaborating in the office, but we still needed physical documents and machines. By 2010, the internet had come along. We had laptops, and you still went in because some documents were physical, and managers physically wanted to see you to be able to manage you. By 2020, you really only need to go to the office for collaboration and creativity, because documents, managers, systems, equipment was all available electronically. So why were you going into the office? Basically, offices had turned into studios. They turned into design studios because you were going into the office to design and collaborate and to design new products and services. So we went into the office to do design thinking, but we never did design thinking on the office. We only did design thinking in the office. So because again, nobody had asked the question why. So how did this happen? It's quite simple. Going back to the 1970s, we began to see the dematerialization of the economy. So GDP was growing, but the energy consumption wasn't. And GDP was growing, but raw material wasn't. So in other words, GDP, work was increasing exponentially, but the consumption of energy and raw materials was flat. So in other words, we'd created the schism between the material and the dematerialized. And this happened because of the service economy. So as we grew the service economy and manufacturing, agriculture, and mining began to shrink, it became very clear that in fact people were going into the office for service jobs, not for any of the other things. So what then happened is we realized in the 1980s that actually, if you went and analyzed a lot of what was happening in offices, most of it was waste. We were over-transporting, over-producing, over-processing. We had inventory defects. People were waiting for things. You had to move around, and there wasn't a great focus on skills. So it became very clear by the 80s we needed to change the way that offices worked. So we began to systemize the office. And so to systemize the office, we implemented systems like GE's Workout and Michael Hammer's book, Reengineering the Corporation. And so reengineering as a concept was developed. We began to remove silos, and we began to systemize, simplify, and obliterate work. So we took work out. That's what GE's Workout means. It means you have to get rid of work, right? Work is not value adding. Work is just effort. If I can produce output without effort, so I don't need work, right? So work it became seen as something that you had to do. Turns out work doesn't necessarily have to be value adding. And that's what we discovered in the 80s. So we began to recognize that we should automate this. And so the offices began to move from manual to high touch, from high touch to high tech. And so increasingly it was about email me this, email me the other. And so we began to create this work shift. We began to move work around because we could now follow the sun. And so the previous workspace was really about email and phones, right? And being physically in the office. And suddenly we were able to now use applications. We were able to work at any time zone, and we were able to access a lot of technology that was suddenly in our PCs, and we refer to this as work shift. So work began to move, and it moved in time. So that was, I could work early, I could work late, I could work at any time, and we began to work in, it began to shift in space. So it didn't matter where I was, I could still work. I could work on planes and buses and trains. And of course, we began to we began to shift the work from physical pieces of documents to digital documents. And of course, that began to accelerate because basically software at the office, and our life began to get appified. So everything that we did in the office and everything that we did as a professional from a transactional point of view or a management point of view, we could do in apps. And there were apps for everything. And in fact, if you look at Office 365, you'll see whether it's communication, collaboration, content, business process management, or people management, there was an app for that. And so in the same way that apps changed our personal lives, actually what happened is apps changed our professional lives as one. Something many of us, I guess, don't realize is actually there hasn't been a reason to go to the office for years. You just haven't noticed it. And part of the reason was we'd become accustomed and acclimatized to the fact that this is normal. And a lot of work was built around so-called relationships that required you to physically see people. But the reality is that if you track the workflow, there was no real reason for people to actually be seeing each other. And obviously collaboration became important, and people said, well, we need to be together for collaboration. Well, here's the thing. Already the number of collaboration tools is exploding. And of course, it's been accelerated with COVID. So this old reason for going into the office, which was collaboration, well, bad news is I can now do that online. I mean, I personally am working with clients in America, in Asia, in Europe. We're collaborating, we're creating, we're building new businesses and new products, and we're doing everything online. I've never met these people. I've worked with some of them now for 9 months, physically never been in the same room with them, and I might never be in the same room with them because it's so easy now to collaborate. And this concept that, yes, it's imperative for collaboration for us to see each other, that's a very 1960s concept, because the vast majority of amazing products in the world today are built by people who never are in the same room with each other. That is actually the new normal. It's a normal that none of us, I guess, associated with work. And so what's starting to happen, I guess, is devolution. This march of digital evolution, it's inexorable, whether you're looking at banking and financial services or insurance, or even healthcare and retail. If you have a look at this, for example, banking and financial services, the dark color basically talks to the fact that this is where they currently are at different parts of banking. You can see that new product and service development is currently heavily digitized. There are some parts of the business that is in pilot, and there are parts of the business where people are looking at digitizing the underlying process. And it gets deeper as you get into retail, and healthcare service providers as well are heavily moving into this digital space. So it's pervasive. And if you add in what's in flight and what's already implemented, you can already see we're up to 70, 80%. We are basically hollowing out the corporation. We are taking work out, and taking work out was a GE concept from the early 1980s, and re-engineering is a concept from the 1980s as well. And so basically, for 40 years, we've been doing exactly the same thing. We've been digitally evolving, and most of us haven't noticed this because it's all been kind of, you just see a little icon appear on your laptop, and suddenly, oh, I can apply for leave online. Oh, I can get my expenses approved online. Oh, I can do a performance appraisal online. Oh, I can, approve payments, or I can approve an assessment or a salary increase online. And the problem that you have is, as more and more of these things came on board, we were hollowing out the company, and things that were previously physical processes disappeared. And so COVID-19 was really the killer blow, in a sense. Basically, the future arrived early. The prognosis in 2019 about when people would start being remote workers was, we said in 2019, this is the Upwork Future Workforce Report, we predicted that by 2028, 73% of all workers, all companies would have remote workers. So basically, we got there in the first quarter of 2020. It's probably the worst forecast ever made, right? The future arrived 9 years earlier than expected. And that forecast was less than a year old. And so as you've heard Ryan say, basically we saw Zoom increase, video conferencing increased. There's video conferencing increase, right? Between February and March. But look at the amount of growth that just occurred in Zoom. Now you heard Ryan say that, we basically, instead of sending people to work, we've sent the work to people. And so, we had 300 million users and Zoom was worth more than the top 7 airlines. That statement's now false because that statement was true in May 15th. Zoom was worth 48 billion. Well, Zoom's now worth 150 billion. Zoom is now worth almost as much as almost the entire airline industry in the world. Right? Just think about what's just happened here, right? Instead of sending people to work, we're now sending work to people. And the question is, are we ever going back? Because many of these planes are now being mothballed, they're being cut up, they're actually never coming back. And this is really important. They're not never coming back. 35,000 hotels are now being shut down permanently in America. More than 60 to 70% of all the cruise ships in the world are being cut up in Greek scrap shipyards. They're cutting up the boats. So these things are not coming back. This concept of when are we coming back to normal, I think people don't get this, right? When I shut down a hotel and I blow up the hotel, it's not coming back. When I take a plane and I put it in the desert and I take the engine out and I sell it for spares, it's not coming back. And when I cut up a cruise ship, it's not coming back. And so there's huge chunks of the world that are just not coming back. Now, is Zoom really worth 150 billion? I don't think so. But is it likely that business class travel will come back once we get a vaccine? I don't think so. Because so much of what we would normally have involved sending people overseas for, we've now become very comfortable to actually do the work remotely. In the past, I would have been expected to fly to Cape Town to do this presentation. I mean, I did a presentation 2 weeks ago in the States. I would have been expected to fly to the States. Today, people are very comfortable to say, no, don't fly. We'll save that money. We'll rather pay you a little bit more and we'll save on hotels and taxis and living expenses and food. And so my personal view is that I think you're going to find business class air travel is going to disappear other than for tourism. I think you'll still have tourism, but I question whether business class travel, which is really what kept a lot of airlines going, whether business class travel is still going to occur. I don't mean business class, I mean business travel. I'm questioning whether business travel is ever going to come back. Because habits have been formed. This is just a graph showing you amazing changes in e-commerce. Habits have been formed, and actually, I don't think people are ever coming back from this because it's very, very, very sticky. We've seen this. Once you start using a mobile app for banking and a whole bunch of transactions, you never go back to a branch again. In the same way, many of us are never going to go back to the way we used to shop. In America, 300 malls are shutting down every year. 300 malls. You're starting to see this in South Africa now. You're starting to see malls suddenly shutting down because there's not enough customers. And there are downsides. I'm not saying there are no downsides to remote work. People struggle with things like collaboration and communication, loneliness. You can see the points I'm making, right? That actually, a lot of these things are softer issues. It's not about I can't work. That's not coming up as an issue. So, I can't work is not the issue. The fact of the matter is I'm actually as productive. I can do everything that I've always been able to do. There are just some complications. It's a little bit harder to collaborate, a little bit harder to communicate. People are getting lonely, but that's a social issue, right? No company has the responsibility to give its employees a social life. Not being able to unplug, that's again a self-management issue. And distractions at home is similarly a self-management issue. So what are some of the key metrics we are seeing? Well, we're seeing the number of meetings has gone up and the meeting size has gone down. The main reason for that is where previously in the past, for example, we would have just had a one-on-one in the corridor. Well, we're now having to set up a meeting to have that one-on-one. There's fewer serendipitous, opportunistic, hey, I see you're alone, I'm going to pop in and say hi. That's not happening as much. Are we missing much? Hard to tell. Hard to tell. If you look at the productivity of most companies, it doesn't seem to have been hurt much, and the rate of product innovation is still continuing where it was. However, people are able to focus less. We have far more interruptions than we've had in the past. We've got a lot more work outside of normal hours, although managers are now a lot more responsive than they've ever been in the past. Everyone tells me that the workday, unfortunately, has gone up. So some of this is sustainable, some of it not, but somehow we found a way to actually cope, and we've been able to execute and deliver. Some industries are clearly much better at work shifting. So things like IT sales and healthcare, account management, education, etc. I think you've seen it shift, and I think you're going to see it stick. You're going to see it stick because it's just starting to work very, very well now. So I think, where's all this going? Well, we're probably going to have to figure out some ways of dealing with some of the softer issues around, relationships, communication, etc., and building trust. It's hard to trust someone that you've only ever seen on a video camera, but it is possible. It's not that it's impossible. I mean, I'm doing amazing work with companies all over the world who trust me to deliver. So this business of, yeah, but we need to actually see you to trust you, that's garbage. We're trusting people with amazing things. We sign NDAs online, and we're collaborating. So really what you want to be doing, I think, is to embrace this. And you need to embrace this and recognize that we're moving from a centralized command and control military structure to really a decentralized peer-to-peer structure. There's an entire chapter on this in my book on the organization of the future, which is going to be more like a hive. And this concept of people working in smaller teams, cooperating with each other. And for many people, this is alien, but for the software development industry, we've had this type of structure for decades. For 20 or 30 years, we've had people working offline in teams and remotely talking to each other in chat sessions. We've had, IBM in the old days, 15 years ago, had mechanisms for developers to talk to each other and share a punch list and share fixes and share tweaks and give each other feedback, etc. We've had this for years. So this is not a new thing in the software industry. It might be new for people in the sales function. It might be new for people in entertainment, etc., and travel. But for the rest of the industry, this is quite normal. So clearly what we're having to do is to figure out ways of building this hive, embracing the cloud, using more third-party open systems, and embracing the fact that people are going to build from home. And home is now an extension of our organization. Clearly, what's also beginning to happen is there's a lot more freelancing that's happening. A lot of people I'm talking to who've lost their jobs have managed to find gigs that are helping them feed the family. And in fact, even pre-COVID, we've had a huge increase in the number of people who said that freelance work has grown substantially in the past 3 years. And I think if going forward, we're going to see this figure quadruple, if not more. It's going to grow enormously. Everyone's going to get a small little gig, come in here, do this piece of work, go away. So I see great exponential growth in that part of the economy. And then, of course, both the organization and the nature of work itself, which was changing, is just going to change faster. It's very difficult to sustain a hierarchy in a world like this, where it doesn't make sense to have sub-team leaders and team leaders and assistant team leaders. It doesn't make sense to have any of that, because now if everyone's not in the same place, well, a flattened structure makes a lot of sense. Your reporting span of control can be a lot more. Your working hours are now more flexible. And where previously we hoarded information, I think we're moving towards a lot more shared information. As I said, command and control is disappearing, and this fear-based management and leadership is gone. Also, I think a lot of people who were hidden from management are now being exposed, because you can now see who's actually doing the work. So you've got a lot more engaging, empowering, and inspiring leadership. It's harder, I guess, to inspire people over a PC. We've moved away from on-premise technology to cloud, so we've actually dematerialized a lot of the physical things that we used to own. And I guess many of you will notice that email is no longer the primary form of communication. I'm using a lot more WhatsApp, WeChat, Telegram, Trello, LinkedIn. I'm getting communication on probably 12 different channels, excluding email. And so email is no longer my primary form of communication. It's now my secondary form of communication. And I'm sure many of you are seeing that as well. Older people are going to struggle with this, by the way. In the same way that they struggle to embrace email, they're going to struggle to let go of it. The way you climb the corporate ladder is going to be different. And I think a lot of silos are getting broken down now, because the minute you find someone's email, this business of, I'm now in my cubicle, I'm in my department, I'm in my office, all of those things have vanished. And we're now in touch with people on the internet. And it doesn't really matter where you work physically and what department you work. The minute I find somebody who can help me, I haven't even met this person, I don't need to meet them, but we connect and engage. Which then allows us, obviously, to work from anywhere. So just some key takeouts from this. I think there is a very strong tendency for people to defend their sunk costs, that, we built the building, therefore we must use the building. I think that's dying very quickly. I mean, I sit on 3 boards. Every company I sit on is selling is selling offices. I mean, I think there's a flood, there's a surplus of offices in the market. And my prediction is a lot of these offices are going to turn into storage units. They're going to turn into a residential property. That's probably where this is going. So we should stop defending these sunk costs. Oh, I built a boardroom, therefore we must use it. I probably had, I don't know, 50 board meetings. A lot of them were emergency board meetings and risk and audit committee meetings in the last 6 months. And I've not had one of them physically. Just think about that. I've only had one work engagement where I've actually needed to be in the same room with other people. So that just demonstrates the fact that you don't need these buildings. You should really start to redesign from a zero base. You've got to ask the question, look, if I was building this business again from scratch and we were a .com, what would it look like? Now's your chance. You're not going to get a chance as easy as that. It's actually interesting. Recessions and crises are wonderful places to initiate and drive through change. Never waste a good crisis is a very, I guess, common sense recommendation. People are very willing to change when there's a burning platform. They'll jump from the burning platform. And so you got a great chance now to redesign, reimagine, and reinvent. You're going to have to change your management processes, obviously, to fit in with this. And some of this should include supporting staff more. Although, to be honest with you, it's really a short-term thing, because to hold people's hands forever, it just doesn't make sense to me. Over time, you're going to hire people who can actually naturally work remotely and who don't need to physically be with other people and who are able to generate enthusiasm on an online platform. You then need to figure this out, right? You need to defend the home and the phone. What do I mean by that? I mean that your company traffic is now traveling through residential lines that were never designed for this. In fact, if you actually analyze the internet in South Africa, there's a collapse in traffic in corporate networks in urban areas, and there's this massive increase in traffic in suburban areas because so many people are now working from home while the children are studying from home, while the daughter is looking on YouTube and the wife or the husband might be watching Netflix. And none of that pieces of infrastructure were designed for that. So that's your first problem. The second problem is that a lot of people are now downloading files and storing them locally on their laptop. Huge problem, because if my laptop gets compromised, I've lost a huge amount of company data. So the way that you manage data and the way that you track data and the way that you lock down PCs and laptops is key. And bear in mind, a lot of people are using personal devices. And so what do you do if somebody's using their home computer? I think there's going to be a big market for companies to buy laptops and give it to companies and say, use my laptop for work, and you're not allowed to download any data and store it on your machine. Certainly not your private machine. Another big issue is that there's over 800,000 malware instances for Android. So do you really want people downloading stuff and doing their business work on their Android cell phone? I think it's a huge risk. Because Android is actually terrible. The Android ecosystem is terrible at managing malware, number one. Number two, and the main reason for that is that unlike Apple, which is able to ensure that about 90% of all devices in the world are basically patched, because they keep reminding you, look, there's an update, there's an update coming. And so basically what it does is they constantly are telling you that, look, we're going to force an update on your device tonight. So please plug it in. And so eventually it becomes very intrusive, but they guarantee that all the iPads, Apple Macs, and the iPhones have the updates forced through. So the patches are implemented. The Android ecosystem doesn't do that. So if you go and look at the Android ecosystem, at the number of devices which are fully patched and fully up to date with operating system updates, it's sitting at 20 to 30%, much lower. And so obviously people who build malware love this, and they are attacking that Android ecosystem heavily. So if you are going to have people working from home on a more consistent basis, how you manage your data, how you manage the laptop, PC, and the fact that people are using their phones all becomes quite important. You therefore need to secure enterprise data wherever it sits. And as I said, it will sit outside of your normal channels. You've got to figure out how you want to do that. You do need to guard the cloud and the channel. So you have to help now these ISPs actually and become more secure, because if the local ISP is compromised, your traffic could be compromised, number one. If it goes down, you have people that are offline. And of course, you're going to be storing a lot of your material processes and data in the cloud. And so you got to make sure that that cloud is actually pretty protected and resilient as well. Finally, you may want to monitor staff behavior. And there's a lot of software out now that actually monitors whether people are physically in front of their computers. They track keystrokes. They're watching what people are doing. And there's a huge focus now on surveillance. of staff, because they recognize that people are working from home. And the challenge, of course, is you don't know who's standing behind the employee while they're working on the screen, and you get things like analog hacks, etc., all of which compromises company security, which, by the way, was one of the reasons for having people in the office, because then at least you could, in theory, control them. But the fact of the matter is, it was always possible for me to take a photograph of my company laptop screen anyway, even though I was actually inside the office. So, folks, there's lots of resources available if you really want to access this. There's a podcast available here. That podcast is a #2 podcast at a point in time in South Africa on Apple. If you go to my website, there's lots of thought leadership articles, and of course, my book has been launched. So please enjoy that as well.
Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning, spending this time for us, your great questions and interaction. Really looking forward to the next one. Thanks again, Prof. Singh, and all the best to you. Look forward to our future engagements as well.
Thank you.
And goodbye.